loud.
Press the minus button to make it quieter.
And Tyler's not there. They don't have their mics on.
Can anyone hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, hi, Nancy. I saw your image on my screen a moment ago.
Hi, Rob.
I'm here. Yeah.
Oh,
They're all doing it from their houses.
I doubt.
That's why it's Zoom.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, we just got a few more people to let in.
Just don't have everybody in yet. Plus it's sitting. They couldn't start, so they were ready.
Hello.
Okay, I'm gonna mute some people. So I'd just like to welcome everybody to the Bluewater Park Water System Community Information Meeting. Thank you so much for coming and participating in this discussion. I'm going to start by doing introductions of the key LAC Local Advisory Committee members and staff. So if you guys can just wave your hand and say hi when I say your name. So we have Rob Dufty, our chair of the Local Advisory Committee, Michael Rushton, the vice chair, Jonathan Bell, Jerry Kane, and Chana Papoa from the LAC committee. For staff, we have, sorry, I'm going to start with Councillor Allison Morris as our council liaison.
For some reason, I can't get my video working, so maybe once everybody's in and you've started, I'll log off and try opening up again and see if I hit the wrong button on the way in.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. We have Patrick Graham, our Director of Engineering, Annette Frischman, our Utilities Coordinator, Kristen Watson, our Chief Financial Officer, and Liam Edwards, our CAO, Chief Administrative Officer. Thanks, guys. I'm Steph, the Committee Coordinator. I'll be facilitating today. I'm sure you all have a lot of questions, so I'm going to ask that during the presentation, if you have clarifying questions, you can please ask those. But if there are deeper discussion questions, if you can hold those to the end of the presentation, that would be helpful. You can put them in the chat or raise a digital hand or a physical hand. I will be muting you, if hopefully you can mute yourself, but I'll probably be muting people for background noise. I think we're ready to roll. We're going to start today with some opening remarks from our CAO, Liam Edwards, and then we'll move on to presentations. Liam?
Okay, thanks, Steph, and thanks to everybody for showing up tonight. It's impressive to see such a good turnout, and so we're glad to see that. The primary intent of today's meeting is to keep you folks all informed about what the current priorities are and the proposed direction is that we believe is best suited for the community through this water service. At the last meeting in July, the path forward that was presented is not so different than what is being presented today, other than the fact that the priorities are effectively changing a little bit. And we're going to get into why that is happening in the presentation. And the actual project in its totality remains the same. There's a ton of work that has to be done in Bluewater Park to ensure that all of the residents can have access to drinking water quality that meets or exceeds the provincial drinking water quality guidelines. That's the key objective that we're trying to do with all the water systems. There's primarily three elements of the project that needs to be completed for Bluewater Park to get to that objective. And that's one element is the supply side of things. Another element is the storage. And the third element is the distribution. And initially we were focused on the supply side only. And we felt that that was the best approach. And we were going to leave storage and distribution to be addressed at a later date. But that priority has shifted a bit to combine some improvements to the most critical elements of the distribution to make sure that when we do the supply side, that it's being used to the best advantage possible, and that it's not going into a distribution system that is reached its age and condition such that it needs renewal or replacement. It's not prudent, in my view, to increase supply only when the distribution itself is not reliable. So that's what we're going to be talking to you about today. We're not really interested in the notion of chasing leaks in a system that is prone to leaks. And we want to make sure that we have a clear understanding about the options in front of us. And one of the key things that we hope we can share with you and that you can gain a better understanding of tonight is that the amount of water consumed in Bluewater Park far exceeds the amount of water that Bluewater Park can produce on its own. And as such, it relies significantly and at times far greater than 50% on the supply from its neighboring water systems. So we must start thinking of and treating these water systems in an integrated way. That's what we're trying to do is look at these three systems that you neighbor against and how to integrate them. But that includes ensuring that all three of the systems are at similar, if not equal standards. And that's essentially what we're trying to get working towards. So again, tonight, we're really just trying to provide you with an update of our latest thinking and the proposed path forward. We welcome your feedback and your questions, and we will most certainly be briefing our new council once we get them up to speed with all the many things that they are going to have to get up to speed on, and we're going to be seeking their approval with the proposed path to go forward, and we most definitely will be coming back to you with what that looks like as well. And so please don't hesitate to share your thoughts and your questions with us tonight. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Liam. Next, we'll have Patrick Graham, the Director of Engineering at Bowen Island Municipality. He'll be sharing a presentation.
I'll share my screen. As Steph said, if there's questions about what I'm saying, presenting that needs clarification, please chime in. I don't want to waste forward if people aren't understanding what I'm saying. So we have had a number of meetings. Do you see that?
I think there's your background notes in there, maybe.
Yeah, we don't see the presentation view. We see the presenter view. There we go. That looks better.
Yeah, so it doesn't really work if I do it via slideshow, so I'll just do it this way.
Okay, that looks good.
So what we had heard in previous meetings, and this is certainly by far the most attended that we've had, and so some people will be haven't seen this information before. We did hear that it would help to try and present the information more clearly. So we've tried to do that, communicating in different ways. We also heard previously that when we were talking about, the urgent priorities, that we want to see the full picture. So we've made some effort to provide the full picture that includes the renewal of the distribution system and the supply upgrades, as well as storage improvements. That may have the cost estimates associated with the complete system renewal may have caused a bit of consternation in the community. What I'm going to be focusing on today is the more what we see as the most urgent priorities. As Liam mentioned, there's not enough well supply to meet demand in the Bluewater Park service area. We've had some assessments of the aquifers on the west side of the island, and some consultants helping us to look at design options, come up with what we believe is the most cost-effective approach, and that's to upgrade the Bowen Bay wells and interconnect the systems. There's also the question about the old distribution system, which is parts of it over 50 years old. There's risk of leaks, and certainly the mains are much too small to deliver adequate fire flows. Part of the risk analysis and assessment is looking at the aquifers that underlie the whole supply system for the West Side residents, and we can't afford to compromise those. We've seen that major leaks can cause damage to groundwater resources, and that's what we definitely want to avoid in future. And we also heard about limitations on and understand limitations on communities' ability to pay, and there needs to be a compromise that looks at, well, what are the greatest risks, and where can we realize the greatest benefits? So this is looking at the water supply, and on the left is a graph showing a peak day. So the most daily demand you'd have in the summer for Bluewater, King Edward Bay, and Bowen Bay systems. And then on the right, on the same scale, is what the wells in those three systems are currently capable of producing. That's the green in the bottom of those graphs on the right. And then what the wells in those systems would be capable of producing if we implement the upgrades that have been proposed in the essentially phase 2 of the water system concept design project, where we looked at the well upgrade options. And by far the biggest benefit and ability to supply more water to the system is in Bowen Bay. The wells, particularly well 1 in Bowen Bay, is very productive, and the sustainable yield of those wells is currently higher than what the current pumps are able to deliver.
Patrick, could I just jump in here? Just a clarification here. Those graphs are showing liters, obviously.
Yes.
But our meters are gallons, so it's a bit confusing in terms of thinking about, we're used to 200 gallons a day and doing some arithmetic. Yeah. So just so everybody's aware, like 150,000 liters is not.
Yeah, that's right. You're approximately dividing by 4 to get gallons, and we do have meters, municipal meters that are in cubic meters or liters. We have meters that are in imperial gallons and meters that are in US gallons, and that's part of the problem with gallons, is that there's 2 types. So we are trying to eventually move towards a system where billing is done in liters, but you're right, currently there's other units in play. So yeah, these are looking at the numbers we're looking at on these graphs are liters per day. And this is, I did add some information to the presentation that was put online, and we'll definitely share that. And hopefully the intent of that was to further clarify what the current situation is and what the best solutions going forward would be. So if we look at this year, in 2022, the meters supplying, or the meters are read monthly in the summertime, and less frequently every 3 months in the rest of the year. So this is just showing that the bottom is the well supply from the Bluewater Park wells, and the orange is the water that's coming from the King Edward Bay system. Currently, there isn't water coming to Bluewater from the Bowen Bay system. That's what's proposed. So you can see that as a longer, drier period stretches on, the ability of the Bluewater wells to supply demand decrease and the requirements to draw more from King Edward Bay. So the total size of each of these bars is the average daily demand over these periods shown. So for September 2nd to October 2nd, that's just over 50,000 liters per day, mostly coming from King Edward Bay. The other aspect is looking at storage. Really, the King Edward Bay reservoir tank is the only one that's of adequate size to really supply a municipal water system with fire protection and with the kind of buffer that that allows for continuing water supply during emergency situations. And it does provide a buffer on those peak day and peak hour demands as well. So that's another reason why the proposed approach is to pump Bowen Bay well water as well as King Edward Bay well water into that large storage tank and supply all three systems from that tank. In looking at, and Liam mentioned that we've gotten more information since we last met and are continuing to look at what our risks and our best options are. If we look at the King Edward Bay, essentially King Edward Bay reservoir tank is supplying also the Bluewater park system. As I showed earlier, it wasn't designed for that. This wasn't the driest or hottest time period in July, August of this year, but the King Edward Bay wells were running full tilt, including the newly commissioned, the well that was commissioned last year in Arbutus Ridge, and they were unable to keep up with demand. The way that the reservoir is supposed to communicate with the wells and tell them it needs more water and essentially always be operating in that 90 to 96% full range. And then as you can see in July, that despite the pumps running as much as they could, the reservoir level kept dropping. And in what's been happening is that the wells will just pump until the water level gets too low, allow it to build back up, and then kick in once the water level builds up again. You don't get a proper recharge on the aquifer when the pumps are operating in this manner. So that's a concern for us and for the residents who are on these water systems, that we shouldn't be operating this way. That increases the risk of compromising the aquifer. And we have to remember too that the Arbutus Ridge pump is the most productive in the King Edward Bay system. That was primarily built to serve the demand of the new development in Arbutus Ridge, which is continuing. And as development proceeds, the demand will increase as well. So having that well come online before development was finished, we had hoped that would buy us a bit of time. I think from what we're seeing in 2022, that it's not really the case. It's certainly better than when we didn't have that well, and I'll show you a slide in a minute to clarify that. But we're not, it's not as productive as the hydrogeology assessments led us to believe it would be. It's still the most productive in the system, but it's not, even with that well, we need the Bowen Bay supply in order to keep up with demand in the summertime.
Patrick, can you clarify, is that well owned by the municipality?
Yes, okay. It was built by the developer and handed over to the municipality.
Thanks.
So I just wanted to show, sorry, the King Edward Bay tank plot from last summer, where we did have significantly hotter weather. You know, we had that heat dome period where temperatures got very high. We see towards the end of June, the tank in the King Edward Bay was dropping very fast, and then ignore the these are their data issues, but then it picked up again, and that was the point, end of June of 2021, when the Arbutus Ridge well was put into service. It did take some time before the tank, towards the end of the summer, was operating the way it should be again. But that did make a huge difference. We'd be in a much worse situation without that. So I just wanted to provide a breakdown before we get into a bit more detail on the phasing. We are proposing still that most of the well supply upgrades that relate to bringing those, optimizing the Bowen Bay wells and bringing them online to meet the demands of the three systems, that proceed in the first phase. We've laid out some of what we feel are higher priority water main replacements, and I'll go through those shortly. And then the next phase would be to replace the remainder of the main, the remainder of the old mains, I'll say, and then future phases would involve a new reservoir tank, similar size to the King Edward Bay tank, near the site of the existing tank, and then eventual capital replacement of the entire system. So that's where the $6.5 million number came from. It's based on a complete renewal of the system, and we understand that that has to be prioritized and phased. So if we look first at my professional map here, if we look first at the well supply, that priority and needing to meet Bluewater Park demand, we can essentially, that involves upgrading these three wells. The most important being well 1, which is this one here. That's going to require bigger pumps, electrical and communications upgrades, and the estimated cost for upgrading those three wells is about $260,000. We also need to install a fill line from those wells up to the chlorination shed at Joan Audrey Lane, where it can tie into the existing fill line from the chlorination shed to the King Edward Bay tank. There's also a requirement, and this has always been a coastal health requirement. They've asked us to be doing this, and they recognize our limitations on resources. Upgrading the wells would trigger the need to develop wellhead protection plans, which is something we need to be doing anyways. The total cost for this phase is about $610,000 estimate. The Bowen Bay would be contributing a portion of that, which would be based on, what's the cost for a like-for-like well replacement, which is what they'd need to do in any case. Rob?
Yes, in previous discussions that we've had during the MOU process and such, Patrick, we talked about Bowen Bay, if they upgraded their mains at the same time as Bluewater, the flow line that would connect to the King Edward Bay chlorination shed would go in that same trench. So there would be significant savings on the Bluewater end of contributing to that flow line from those wells. Are you going to be talking about what the forecast for Bowen Bay upgrades is going to be today as well?
I'm not going to be able to talk about that much today. We do have a meeting with them on November 10th, I believe it is. And I will certainly suggest that it would be best to to move forward with at least that water main upgrade along Windjammer. And yes, that would reduce the cost of the fill line. It'd be put in a common trench. I don't know whether they're prepared to proceed with that at this time. The problem is the level of urgency relating to the well supply is a different, higher level of urgency than the upgrades for fire protection. I mean, I know they want to do it at some point, but it gets into a situation where we may not be able to defer the work and wait for the Bowen Bay plans to be sorted out in terms of the water main upgrades. But we'll definitely talk about it.
Okay, yeah, and also we had talked about when the Windjammer upgrades for both Bowen Bay and Bluewater Park take place as one larger project, you would get some cost efficiencies in that as well. I just wanted to point those out to the community.
Yeah, thanks. So I mentioned phase 2 of well upgrades, and there is an ability to upgrade the Bluewater well 3 pump to increase capacity. As I showed earlier, it's much less additional supply than the proposed Bowen Bay well upgrades would provide, and so it deferred to try and reduce the cost of phase 1, the amount of money that has to be borrowed now. There were some questions raised about other water supply options. The aquifer study and the urban systems reports did look at this question of where it would likely make most sense if you were to develop new wells, probably in the area shown in green here, which is private property, the Menzies property. It's likely more expensive than the upgrading program we've proposed, and there's substantial exploration expense in developing new wells, and no guarantees of the capacity that what you find is going to meet your needs. Whereas we do have significant data from the existing wells. We've had professional engineers and hydrogeologists look at that and confirm that we're able to meet the existing and near-term needs anyway using those wells. And it's not to say that depending on what happens in future, there may need to be new wells developed. This is a likely area to explore. We have also, I just wanted to point out that in our dealings with the developer of Arbutus Ridge and also the adjacent, the Stewart property, Ian Stewart's property, he's got a number of wells, including one near the top of his property adjacent to the Arbutus Ridgelands that he's proposed and open to dedicating as a municipal well. So to keep the option open for that, a fill line and right-of-way will be established, has been done for the phase 3 work, which is done, and then phase 4, which would involve building this road, would include a fill line up to the King Edward Bay Reservoir tank. And it has similar operational advantage as the Arbutus well, which is right here, right next to the tank, in that it's near the tank and you're not pumping as much to get it into the tank. So that may be a promising option for future supply as well. There were questions raised about surface water. There is that existing surface water reservoir, which has a relatively small catchment area and capacity relative to the demand. Grafton Lake is really the only surface water source that may have more reliable supply in terms of overall supply than the groundwater options we've been looking at. And certainly treatment requirements and filtration requirements for surface water are more stringent and costly and for groundwater. If you're developing a reservoir, you also have dams, a dam to operate and maintain as well. I saw a hand and then it disappeared. So that's the summary on water supply and the proposed path forward to increasing the supply in order to meet demand. And now I'm going to get in a little bit more detail about the distribution system.
Patrick, can I just ask, I saw more wells and surface water. I didn't see anything about individual homeowner catchment and harvesting. Is that not part of this process?
Yeah, well, demand management, essentially reducing demand on the municipal wells is definitely part of this process. And a big part of that is the rates, is a rate structure that encourages conservation. And you've pointed out things that could be, there may be a way to provide incentives for individual properties to add on rainwater catchment or similar measures. There may be development restrictions that we want to look at. So yeah, demand management is definitely part of the process. It's just not at the focus of this.
Can you tell me, do you have information that would indicate the increase of water consumption in the summer? I'm assuming that the increase largely could be contributed to outdoor water usages like lawn watering or garden watering. Is there something that shows those statistics?
Just go back to this slide, which is, yeah, I mean, we can look at how water use changes over the year. I haven't compiled statistics on that, but yes, generally, you have water closer to 50,000 liters a day that can get up over 70,000 liters per day in the summer. And then you could have peak days that are twice that.
Okay, thank you.
Same people that budgeted the ferry lineup.
Patrick, it's Rob Duffy. I just wanted to add a couple of things about the rainwater catchment conservation efforts that the LAC and even during the MOU process has been a big proponent of moving those kinds of initiatives forwards in whatever form, and the eventual of potentially changing building permit requirements, that kind of thing. So that has been front and center for us to communicate back to the municipality. The other thing about the large open reservoir, Bluewater reservoir, we call it, up at the top of Mutiny Lane, that used to actually be everybody's drinking water up until around 2010, when we connected to King Edward Bay and we turned the tap off to that. But I think with climate change, I think all options still need to stay on the table. So it's good that we didn't decommission that, and that in the future we could look at that as a non-potable firefighting supply to accentuate the system, that kind of thing. So I just wanted to point that out, that we need to continue to keep all options on the table for future demand 10, 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road, depending on where the climate change goes with us.
Hear, hear.
Thanks. Okay, I'm going to move on to looking at the distribution system. And there's quite a lot of information on here, so I'll just go through the highlights. Yes, generally we've had two what I'll call major leaks in the last few years. We don't have, so that would be near the intersection of Spyglass and Windjammer, the leak that was repaired in 2019. And then this section of pipe was replaced in 2020, early 2020. And then there was this summer in June, there was a fairly major leak that was running for a couple of days before it could be repaired. And that was essentially a jagged rock punching through the water main. The water main itself was iron and may have additional life, but it was poorly installed. And that's part of the issue. You can't really know where that's occurring with the information that we have, or where that could occur next. So we have to look at what information we do have and make our best judgments. So there are a couple of others that are noted in our GIS, these X's here. I tried to get some more information, and that was from prior years, and wasn't able to really determine too much about those. More frequent are the leaks in the service lines, and a number of those have been repaired over the years. Certainly, if you're installing a new water main, you would redo the service lines as well as part of that. So we are concerned about that section of water main where we saw the leak earlier this summer. We've observed that it's at least where we've seen at these locations, it was not well installed and at risk. It would make sense to extend the new water main that was done in 2020 up to the valve at Captain's Way. That would be one priority. We have some concern also about the water main on Spyglass, which is small, a 2-inch water main, and it's this thin wall polyethylene that would generally have a higher probability of failure than the iron pipe, the ductile iron pipe. It's also of concern because it's close to the creek, and that makes leaks more difficult to locate. We saw that with, there was the leak near Spyglass, that it's not that staff didn't know there was something wrong. They weren't able to locate it easily. Part of the reason is because while everything's underground, you can, we've only got so much data and physical works to look at, and then there's listening devices that the operations crew use to essentially, you can hear leaks, but if there's a creek next to it, it makes that a lot more difficult. So we're recommending upgrading that main. The other two is we have the similar type of pipe, 2-inch lines that are feeding the Bluewater system along Windjammer and along Captain's Way for about 210 and 150 meters, and those feed into 6-inch main and into a 4-inch main. So we have the similar concerns about the pipe that's on the thin wall pipe that's on Spyglass. It's also a restriction to the flow to the entire system. The hydrants, well, none of the hydrants have fire flow, and upgrading these mains wouldn't provide, the FUS standard of fire flow, but it would improve flows in the event that there is a fire situation at a house or forest interface. So those are the, and then the other, we have a number of maps of the system, and they all say different things. And so we've done our best to try and confirm with the staff and the information we do have what's going on. It appears that there was a newer 6-inch main installed along Captain's Way, but most of a lot of the properties are still connected to the old 2-inch line. And so that's still active and still poses a risk. We're operating an old line that could fail. It would be relatively inexpensive to, well, compared to water main replacement, to switch those properties over to the newer main and decommission the 2-inch line. So we're recommending doing that as well. There was.
So you're going 2-inch to 4-inch?
No,
6-inch.
these would be
6-inch.
These would be replaced with 8-inch, or this would be replaced with
Okay.
6-inch, and this would be replaced with 8-inch.
Sorry, I'm sorry, you're replacing the PVC with metal pipes?
No, it would probably be PVC pipe that we would install. This
Yes,
is
it's
isn't
the blue.
PVC.
Yeah, it's the blue poly standard for water. It's if you had been up at our Arbutus Ridge this summer, you would have seen the type of piping that is now utilized for water mains.
Right. I work at the golf course, so yeah, we do a lot of replacing pipe every day.
Patrick, it's Rob Duffy. Just to go back on the water leaks, I did a bit of a homework exercise by reading through 18 years of minutes of the Bluewater Park, and since 2004, there's been 13 leaks in the water mains, not the private side of the water meters, but the mains themselves. So we've had 13 leaks over the system. The leak that was encountered, the major leak that was encountered in 2019 that is suspected to contribute to the eventual termination of most of the Bluewater wells in the well field up in Mutiny Lane, that actually had a leak some years ago that was fixed by the municipality that I guess then failed. That actual section had also a road failure a number of years ago dating back to about 2010. So that is one of the reasons why in 2020 we negotiated with the municipality for a cost split between roadworks and water system users to pay half and half for that eventual permanent repair on that. And then the other major leak that I was been able to determine in the last few years is that a fairly major one at the base of Forecastle Way as well. So yeah, the system has been leaking, and it's 13 in the last 18 years, which is a fair amount. But I just wanted to point that out as more of a historic thing for the community to know.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted there was some questions about, how much water gets lost to leakage, and it really depends. So this is showing, the first one is on the left is 2022 water use in the Bluewater system. So that's combined. It's looking at the blue is the metered supply, and then the orange is the difference between the supply into the system. So the 2 meters coming in from King Edward Bay plus the Bluewater well field minus the meter supply. So most of that is assumed to be lost to leakage. So we did see that there was the leak that occurred in June was fixed. That one was obvious, right? It leaked and water was coming out of the road and flowing down the road. It was easy to locate. We couldn't secure an excavator over the weekend to get it done. It was done on the Monday. It did noticeably increase the leakage to about 25% of total. This is showing some information from 2019. So early 2019, and you can see it's a lot more water, over 50% leakage. And the biggest difference was really just the ability to locate the leak. This leak in 2022 may have been leaking more water. It was just a lot easier to locate. So you can lose a lot of water through leakage, and we have a couple of examples from recent years. And
Do you have 2013 to 2019?
2013? I'm not sure how far back our reliable data goes. We certainly have information we've been looking at back to 2018. But yeah, we may have some information from that period.
And I believe some of the reports that were presented in the August 2019 community meeting that over 80 residents from Bluewater and the West Side attended. Glenn, the stand-in director of engineering at the time, did have some of the data that did go back a fair amount into the 2014 to kind of show those kind of losses at that point that kind of reinforced that the leak in 2019 that was found wasn't going on for years and years prior to that. So I do remember that as part of those presentations. If you did want to go back into those, Patrick.
Well, and I did look. I didn't show it here, but the loss in September of 2018. So the prior year, a few months prior to this, was closer to the 15 to 20%, which we more typically see. So at some point between September 2018 and March 2019, that leak developed.
Which aligns with the LAC meeting minutes where the manager of public works was highlighting a greater need for water supply on Bluewater and the suggestion to drill a new well at that point. But that well wasn't drilled in late 2018 when the LAC gave approval for it up to 75,000. And then it was an emergency drilling of the two wells in, I believe, May of 2020, when it became a severe deficit for water supply in the Bluewater system. So that's kind of how that all came about.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been 20. It was before I was here. Must have been in 2019 that those wells were.
Yeah, they were drilled in May of 2019
Right.
as a reactionary to the massive loss and the massive reduction in volume in the King Edward Bay tank. We were losing water left, right, and center.
They were duds, right?
And well, the deep well is a dud. The shallow well can produce, but it's going to need treatment in order to ever bring it online.
Well, and it just really highlights the need to look at the overall picture and so the Bluewater well field is not really the place to obtain additional supply.
And that proved it at that point. It was unfortunately a $43,000 drilling of two well expenditure that didn't produce anything for the Bluewater users.
Ouch.
Yep. Came out of our reserves.
So, this is just summarizing the highest priority main replacements that I've just explained. That the section along Windjammer where the leak occurred in 2022, the spyglass section, the 50 millimeter main there, the two sections that connect to the King Edward Bay system at Windjammer and Captain's Way, and then, as I mentioned, that old 2-inch main, the properties that are still on that should be switched over and we can decommission that. I'm not sure if the leak you referred to at Forecastle was in that old 2-inch main. It may have been. And then there are the remaining mains. So just going back to this slide, the yellow mains are the older ones, and then the blue that would be part of phase 2 replacement. And there needs to be a plan for that. And then the blue ones are the newer mains that will need to be replaced at some point, but may have more service life left in them.
And just quickly, just for the newcomers, new residents in Bluewater, the Bluewater system, the development started in the early 1960s, and throughout the 1960s, the developer was installing water mains and the open reservoir. 1973 is when the water tank, the vertical water tank at the top of Mutiny Lane was commissioned into existence. So that's just a bit of a brief history of what kind of age that we're dealing with in the Bluewater area for various sections. And of course, development happened over a span of a number of years. And so that's why with Patrick saying certain sections have a younger life versus other sections in the system.
Right. So this is the in terms of the priority water main replacements. So there's the 410 meter section. There's the section along two sections along Windjammer to replace with 200 millimeter diameter mains. If we're to install eventually a new reservoir tank, you just mentioned the age of the existing tank, certainly at the end of its life or near the end of its life. We would need a fill line for that tank. It makes a lot more sense to install the fill line as you do the mains. So installing that in a common trench, the new Windjammer mains would make sense. So there's $100,000 cost for that. And then the other main replacements that we reviewed, switching over the properties that are still on that old main on Captain's Way. So about 980,000 is the estimate, the total cost estimate for those phase 1 water main replacements. And then the phase 2 main replacement, which is the orange main, the remainder of the old mains, we'll say, is about 1.38 million. And we need to demonstrate a commitment to asset management, best practices, becoming more proactive with our infrastructure management. It's not just this system. It's not just water infrastructure. It's unfortunately a lot of time and money and effort spent responding to crises and reacting to emergencies and getting to a place where we can be more proactive and have the reserves in place to be proactive and manage the infrastructure capital replacements as they're needed. That's where we want to get to. I just wanted to say something about improved fire protection. We've talked about the main replacements in the context of the risks of failure, the losses that can cause, the risks that can pose to the aquifers. And we talked about you're replacing your existing 2 and 4 inch mains with larger 6 and 8 inch mains so that you can deliver fire flows to the properties that need it, in the event of a house fire or a forest interface fire. In order to achieve full fire protection, a new reservoir tank is also needed. When I say full fire protection, that's what the FUS identifies as, based on their statistics, as 76 liters per second for 1.6 hours. So the existing mains are undersized. And then this is just a photo of the main on Windjammer Road, the section that was replaced. And so it's a 4 inch main, but it's probably closer to 2 inch because of the assume mineral deposits that have built up over the years.
Was that the recent section in June, or was that from 2020?
That was from the early 2020
okay
section. Yeah.
Thank you.
How will that affect your insurance? Because I live at the top of Schooner Lane, so I have to pay an extra $1,000 because I'm not within a certain distance of a hydrant. But all these should you?
Well, it's a good question. I don't fully understand the FUS ratings. They've rated all the water systems on Bowen. My understanding, and I need to follow up on this, is that they'll be doing a review sometime soon and re-rating these systems. So they just look at it. Didn't seem to be very comprehensive. They just looked at proximity to hydrants. So if you're within 300 meters of a hydrant, doesn't
But
matter.
but it
You know,
doesn't
if it's
work.
on a 2-inch, if it's on, yeah, it's not a real hydrant. It doesn't.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's almost like, and I don't, I'm not an insurance expert, but it's almost like fake insurance, right? Because so you have a fire and then the insurance company investigates, determines that there's nowhere near FUS fire flows at the hydrants, and
Right.
claim denied. I don't know. Like that seems like a
Mhm.
so it seems like the Bowen Bay rating, like it's rated 3B, and maybe it could be improved to 3A by upgrading the mains. It really should be rated at the same as Bowen Bay, right? Which doesn't have hydrants because the mains aren't big enough. So that wasn't a simple answer to your question, but it's
Okay.
a concern.
We have
Close
another
enough.
hand up. Patrick, there's another hand up. Andrew?
Hey, I'm new to the Bluewater neighborhood, but I just had a couple questions. This is a newcomer. Just some clarification on the existing mains. You indicated it was like, is it iron? Is it this picture here is cast iron here?
Yes.
So is the
It's
existing
ductile
main?
iron. That's yeah.
No, ductile iron has a concrete liner in it. You don't get nodules. Sorry, I know pipe quite well. So generally speaking, ductile iron has a concrete liner, so you don't get the nodule buildup. Cast iron is where you do get it. And then also the previous pipe that you showed, the 2-inch, that was C900 PVC Blue Brute with the saddles that you want to replace as well. And then I heard speaking that you guys want to replace the rest of the main with PVC as well, indicative of what might be installed. But my concern or question is PVC in general, C900 Blue Brute water main pipe, which is it's a fragile pipe. You do need to have proper bedding surround. There's no real structural integrity to it. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, how are we going to ensure if we do these water replacements that it's the adequate type of pipe, first of all, and that we're having quality assurance that it's getting installed properly, because ductile iron is far more forgiving in regards to installation because it doesn't require your pipe surround to be properly compacted and embedded to provide the protection that PVC requires. So I'm just trying to kind of figure out the age of the infrastructure. The other thing is cast iron, ductile iron has a life, if properly installed, 100-year lifespan.
That's good.
Cast iron is at, depending on your pressure class, but generally speaking, 100 years. Cast iron should have around 60 to 80 years. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around some of the problems here, because I'm getting confused between the water leaks as well as, are these water leaks or water leaks or both too?
I can help that out a little bit here, Patrick, or Rob Duffy. It's been proven over and over the years that a lot of the roads on Bowen have not been adequately bedded and built up. The leak that happened between Isleview and Spyglass and Windjammer in 2019, the pipe, I believe it was 13 to 16 feet down, buried. That road section was actually sloughing quite a bit and had been backfilled with old stumps and tree roots and all sorts of debris in that had rotted and sloughed out over the years. So that's the other animal in the room about the quality of the road bed. And then just this leak in June where it was punctured by a stone, so improper bedding in that. And the question has been posed to the municipality about proper road bedding. And I've posed the question, is this the responsibility of the users of Bluewater, or is this a road public works initiative that needs to happen at the same time? Plus also the roads are in very poor pavement shape, and they were chip sealed about 10 years ago because the pavement was pretty much disintegrating. And what is the municipality going to do to upgrade those through public works reserves funds as well at the same time? Because cutting up the roads to put water mains in and then just trying to patch chip seal isn't going to going to hold true either. So there's a number of pronged approach that we need to look at here, and I know that Patrick needs to think about this in a lot broader picture, and at that from the municipality contribution as well for the overall. But definitely, that's some very valid points, Andrew, about what are we going to be laying back into these roads that could be prone to failure in the future if we don't get it right initially.
Yeah, I mean, those are questions Andrew was asking are certainly detailed design questions.
Yeah.
I expect we'd be hiring an engineering consultant to produce tender documents for us, and we would have inspection of the installation, make sure it's installed the way it was designed and the way it was intended. I said C900 because that is typical. It's not the only option. There may be other options that make sense in this case. The blue pipe I showed earlier is much thinner wall than the C900. It's something else. It's this thin blue pipe that somebody had and put in a number of places.
That's a good
in the
one.
system.
Well, what I would suggest here is that some of these design details and such we can park in the question parking lot stuff that we can circulate further, because we're going to have more sessions directly with the community and back with the municipality on further community meetings that we can clarify some of these further details. Because if we get bogged down in the details a little bit too much today, we're not going to get to the end of the presentation. So we've got to watch out for that too.
True.
Okay, so won't get into too much detail about the next phases, but ultimately a new reservoir tank would make sense to be somewhere in the order of 650 cubic meters. The current tank is 82, not to mention 50 years old. Essentially, under the plan that's being proposed, the King Edward Bay tank would be the primary tank for all three systems until this tank is built. There was some questions asked about why not provide the fire protection to the system from the proposed phase 4 Arbutus Ridge tank, the high zone tank. And consultants did look at the cost of, you need to provide a dedicated main to provide fire flows to the upper end of the Bluewater system. And that would be more costly than the new reservoir tank. There would need to be a new pressure reducing valve that would change the operation of the system. And there would need to be the remainder of the fill line that hadn't been installed as part of the Windjammer water main upgrades would have to be installed. So overall, about 1.6 million. Rob, you have your hand up. And then phase 4 is essentially falls under ongoing capital replacement. We are developing asset management plan, overall asset management plan for the municipality, and that's going to have component plans for each type of infrastructure. We're currently working with a software provider to set up our inventory, and then in parallel with other steps to developing asset management plans, which is defining levels of service and coming up with our estimates of remaining service life of infrastructure and replacement costs and all of that. So that's something we're actively working on. We did estimate that they're another close to $2 million, in addition to the phases we described previously, would ultimately be required for complete renewal of the system. So this is the same graph or table I showed earlier. I've just gone through all of these cost items in a bit more detail. So essentially, we're looking at, well, what we're recommending is borrowing long-term borrowing by Bluewater Community to finance phase one essentially right away. And with the financing for phases 2 to 4 and the timing as well, still to be determined. So in terms of next steps, we do have, and there's some urgency to this because I'll get into that in a bit, but to proceed with the detailed design and implementation of the Bowen Bay well number 1 and number 2 upgrades. The Bowen Bay well is the most productive municipal well, and it's really central to this well optimization plan. Failure of this pump has occurred, and replacement in the very near term is needed. We'd much rather take this opportunity to advance the well upgrades than to simply replace a like-for-like pump and then essentially throwing, not taking advantage of that opportunity. So that needs to move forward quickly. There's going to need to be a community referendum or something similar to confirm the borrowing for the phase 1 work. Ideally, we would complete this MOU between the municipality and the 3 water systems. It's not a prerequisite to moving forward with phase 1. We do need to develop our multi-year budget and funding strategies for remaining improvements. We need to confirm water rates and contribution to reserves. Kristen's going to be talking a bit more about that. Identify and pursue grant opportunities. We certainly are always looking out for this. Grants for capital replacement are hard to come by. Typically, it's not a winner. They expect municipalities to be funding, and that's where we want to get to, funding our capital replacement of our systems through the water rates and contributions to the system.
Sorry, Patrick, there's a question in the chat about Infrastructure Canada grants. Is that what you're speaking to there?
Well, I was talking about grants in general, but yes, the Infrastructure Canada grants, we have had discussions about whether the Bluewater project would be something to advance. Generally, it wasn't our best bet, and we haven't seen. If there's opportunity, we'll pursue it, of course.
And just to add to that, Patrick, during all yours and mine and Liam and the other chairs on the West Side discussions about the potential for grant funding, there'd probably be a lot of strings attached to it, including the requirement for the merger amalgamation of all 3 water systems. It would be a very large, comprehensive project with the advancements of full fire flow protection, increase. So it's not just about maintenance to replace existing infrastructure, because grants don't typically cover that. They want something bigger and better out of it to be eligible for grant funding like that, including the amalgamation most likely. And just to add, I believe Eagle Cliff has applied for 2 grants over the last few years and have been denied. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was an infrastructure, and it's the type of project that scores better on these grant applications because you're improving the drinking water quality, you're delivering opportunity for all these wells to connect to a municipal system. It was more of a promising opportunity to actually get the money, but as you can see, there's a major downside in that then you're tied to the grant timeline. So yes, we applied for a grant for the Eagle Cliff, the Cove Bay connection project that was not successful, and then there was another opportunity that arose that we applied for, and so it took a year to hear about the first one. We're probably not going to hear about the second one until early next year if we're lucky. So, you know, it's essentially 2 years. It's pushed the project. That's the major downside. It's then you become tied to these. And sometimes they're cumbersome. Like if it's over a year between the time you apply to when you hear about it, it's going to affect your project timeline significantly. The other thing I've noted here is looking at improving our capacity for emergency response. So we would like to purchase an excavator so that we, you know, if we had a similar situation that we had in June of this year, we were able to respond right away. There may be improved leak detection equipment that we can acquire. The other item I haven't noted here.
Can we share that with the golf course?
Not sure.
But typically those kind of purchases are shared amongst all the LSAs throughout Bowen Island, as well as roadworks and that, because there's a multifaceted advantage to the municipality to have equipment like that. Not
I'm just asking.
Yeah. But that's how we've kind of framed it in the past.
So long as we get a free round of golf.
Oh, entirely. Yes. We do. All Bluewater residents get free golf.
Woohoo! Yeah. The other thing I hadn't noted here as a bullet was updating the aquifer study and the well upgrade pre-design report based on what we've seen in 2021 or 2022. There's a couple of aspects of concern. I mentioned the Arbutus well not performing as well as we'd expected. We also saw more recently the Bowen Bay system without well one, that the other two having struggles keeping up with demand in Bowen Bay, which was not what we'd expected to see. So we've confirmed with our hydrogeologists and civil consultants that the recommendations are are sound, and this is the best path forward. We just want to make sure that we understand as much as we can about the aquifers and the operational requirements that we're going to need to undertake.
We appreciate what you're doing, Patrick.
Thanks. In terms of, I mentioned the Bowen Bay wells 1 and 2. There's, they as expected, they would like us to deal with this right away. That's important that we not get into a long period of waiting, whether we get approval for borrowing, and it's not something that can wait for months. We really need to advance the at least the assessment and design for upgrading these wells. It is critical for the long-term water supply of Bluewater, and
I agree. We need to spend the money. Let's do it. Let's do it, people.
Well, that's so that would be the one thing. I know we were saying this is more about information. If we can get some endorsement when we switch over to the LAC meeting to advance this work, that would be very helpful.
There is a question in the chat about household impacts.
And I think that's Kristen has a presentation that's going to clarify that.
Is it just got an eye on time now? It's 7:16.
Okay, that's it.
Okay. Yeah. And Brittany's got her hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick, for the presentation here. So my name is Brittany Donnie. I'm a relatively new resident along Windjammer. Just trying to wrap my head around the drivers for this, and in particular, any sort of upgrades that are happening along the water main and or any of the other infrastructure. So specifically, can you just clarify, I think it would be a helpful segue before getting into the finances piece, just what are the drivers for any upgrades to the infrastructure? And is it specifically meeting Is it like a level of service driver for fire protection, or would it also be to meet future water demand? So just trying to get a sense of who would be benefiting from these upgrades, and is it only existing residents and or would it be future residents connected to the system?
Well, the biggest driver for the water supply upgrades is that Bowen Bay or Bluewater doesn't have enough water to meet demands, relies on King Edward Bay. We've seen signs of stress on the King Edward Bay wells, not being able to keep up with the Bluewater demand. So they're not, the system wasn't designed for, there's 40, well, currently 41. As Arbutus Ridge builds out, there'll be more. And there's close to 150 in Bluewater. So we need the additional supply from Bowen Bay. That's the primary driver for that. The assessments of water supply options did look at future demand as well, based on some assumptions about growth and assumptions about climate change. And so we are expecting that the supply upgrades could meet certainly existing and near-term demand. There may need to be future growth may provide driver for more supply being needed. And we would expect if there was a major subdivision, there's one large property in Bluewater, that subdivision would have to supply the water to meet their demand and to benefit the system. The driver for the water main replacements is twofold. It's limiting risk of failure, and protecting the aquifers is a key driver, and then ultimately upgrading and upgrading the flows in the system, and ultimately providing fire flow. So those are the drivers for those components. The driver for the reservoir is fire flow, as well as improving the resiliency and ability of the system to respond for emergency situations. So that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I think that's good for now. I'll maybe hold off on further questions just for the CFO's presentation. Thank you.
Patrick, it's Allison. Is there any idea how King Edward Bay is listed as 41 connections right now? How many more will there be, roughly?
How many more will there be? Give me 1 second here.
Does that encompass Arbutus Ridge?
That encompasses part of Arbutus Ridge. So I think there's about another 20.
A lot more, Allison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that doesn't include the Stewart property.
The Stewart property is non-municipal system. Yeah.
No.
So no.
But it's going to be reliant on fire flow protection eventually.
The Stewart property?
Yeah.
Well, there's a hydrant that
Yeah.
would close enough for some of those upper properties, I guess.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Well, there's no hydrant for Schooner Lane, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Drag from the bottom.
Yeah.
And I know that this has come up in some of our side discussion. Chana has brought a fair amount of this up recently about it's fine for us to connect up to get Bowen Bay connected up into the system, even though they are connected now. That was done in 2010. That wasn't an incorrect way of connecting it into the system. But also what's going to happen 20 years down the road potentially for water demand, and is the aquifers going to be enough even 20 years down the road?
Believe they will be, and it's our best bet. You know, there's, I guess there's no guarantees about anything. I mean, even
Right.
looking at an assessment of the aquifers, you have hydrogeologists making judgments about, you know, what they're seeing in a few holes here and there. And,
Yep.
you know, based on, you know, I think we've gotten the hydrogeologist who knows the most about this area and this aquifer, to take a very in-depth look at it. And based on that and Urban Systems advice, we're confident that this will be a water source that can meet the needs of all of these communities.
And as stated
Agreed.
before,
What is the cost of water? It's of good water. First world problem. What is the cost of water in Syria or Iran? Or you know, I think we're doing pretty good.
definitely. But as stated before, the whole concept of water conservation, water rain catchment, rain harvesting, that kind of thing needs to go hand in hand with whatever we decide here, so that we're also looking to the future for when we're not in Bluewater anymore, but future residents, that they can still have a reliable water system for them to use.
Totally agree.
So just a quick word on that, Rob. Liam Edwards here. The municipality is definitely keen to look at those types of things. We also have to be cognizant of the limitations that we have available to us through Building Code Act requirements. And so we cannot force existing users to implement rainwater catchment systems. We can do that for net new types of things. And we're looking at those types of things. And there are comprehensive development communities on Bowen where they are required to have that type of stuff. And so we definitely want to pursue that. But
we can
Thank you.
promote it through communications.
Can we, are people interested in talking about the financial impact for a moment?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Kristen, do you have something to share?
Yeah, I can share just a little bit of the work. As Patrick mentioned, the estimated cost of this initial phase 1 project is about $1.5 million. There's about $80,000 currently in the Bluewater Park Reserve. So there's really nothing in the cupboard to help offset the costs of this. Again, we seek grant opportunities wherever and whenever we can, but we're just not confident that this project is going to be a high, have a high rate of success for grants. So worst case scenario, we have to budget to fund it 100% through debt. So I put together in the agenda package just a quick little spreadsheet that shows current borrowing rates. They're floating around 4.1%. Interest rates went up again today, unfortunately, by another 0.5 percentage point. So 4.1% is likely low. We do have some flexibility about when we lock in that rate, though. So if borrowing rates were continuing to go up in the short term, and we had a high degree of confidence that it was kind of temporary and they would start to taper off within the next 5-year period, and they would then come down, we could float that debt for a 5-year period to see and wait and lock it in within the next 5 years. Maybe when inflation starts to come down, it's a conversation that needs to be had. What's the risk of holding off that interest rates, are going to go even higher within the next 5 years when we will be forced to lock it in? But again, it's conversations. There's different options out there. So we have to make sure that we make you aware of all of the different scenarios that are out there around borrowing. So I did this quick estimate based on current 4.1% interest, amortized it as long as possible. My feeling is that this water system is here for a very long time, and those people who are going to benefit from the water system should also contribute to it. So in my view, I think that debt should be amortized over a 30-year period, which is the longest that we can possibly do it. I'll just share this little worksheet with you so you can see it. Let's see. Okay. Have you got the worksheet that I have up? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, so annually on 1.56 million at 4.1% for 30 years, the annual payment is 92,000, almost 93,000. And sorry. There we go. And that works out for each property. That would work out to $608 for each property. There's currently 153 properties within the Bluewater Park area. Now, under a parcel tax scenario, I know that I had a question, if somebody wanted to, would they be able to prepay that payment? So certainly it's called commuting the debt. There's an opportunity for, if somebody really didn't want to have that parcel tax attached to their property for the next 30 years, we could do a present value calculation of all of those payments. That property owner could prepay that amount and they would be exempt from the parcel tax. So it's definitely an option. So again, just to reiterate, the 1.56 million over 30 years at 4.1% per year works out to about $608 per property. With every new property that would be developed within that district, they would also be subject to that. So any additional lots that were ever added, they would be subject to that payment, and that would reduce a little bit everybody else's payment proportionately throughout the district. I think if you want to do a quick rule of thumb for how much the debt is based on those terms, 4.1% over 30 years, if you take the total amount of debt, divide it by 100,000 and multiply it by $40, that's your charge per property. So that's a really quick thumbnail if we're talking different numbers here. Or you can always email me and ask me. I'm happy to run that calculation again for anyone.
Thanks,
So I think that was it for the borrowing costs, the cost of borrowing. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Don's got a question. Don? I'm just gonna ask you to unmute.
Sorry about that. I have a place on Windjammer. So this 608 per year for the next 30 years, that's just phase one. Now there's going to be 3 other phases on top of that with similar numbers. Is that still all divided by that 153 properties?
Any amount that is deemed to be attributable just to the users of Bluewater Park, you're always going to use that 153 number to divide, or the actual numbers of properties to come up with a kind of a thumbnail estimate of how much per property owner.
Okay, thank you.
There may be more.
There always is.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
So, and
That's
just
true.
a quick point on that, on Dawn's question. There are other elements to the overall integrated system-wide project that aren't necessarily reflected here, that those costs would be shared across the other systems too.
Okay, thank you. Another question in the chat. Yeah, again, about the phases. So if it's the phase one is cost per household, then we multiply that by 4 for the 4 phases.
That's a really high level way of looking at it, because what are the phases? There's 608 for the first phase, 568 for the second phase, and 623 for the third phase. Now that's, again, the same assumptions, 4.1% interest, 30-year borrowing. We really have to, we'd have to look at the interest rates applicable at the time that the debt was locked into long-term borrowing to finalize that. But that's, yeah, for a thumbnail number, that's what we'd be looking at.
Kristen, It's Rob Duffy. Have you done an analysis of private water systems? And of course, you would know the BIM water systems of costs per household per year on what they're currently paying and potentially what they could be paying for future. Because we're not the only LSA that would be looking at substantial upgrades over the coming years. But it would be like I've heard that Josephine Lake, for instance, residents are paying upwards of $2,000 or more per year for their private water system for their individual things like that. I'm curious, do you have those kind of numbers just to give a comparison of what other systems are paying versus what we currently are paying at around $1,000 a year?
Not private water system data. One thing that is really interesting about the private systems, they're regulated by the provincial utility, and Liam knows a lot more about this. He's on a private water system, but under their regulations, they're actually required to fully fund their capital requirements every year. So not only do they have to look at user rates, but they don't have the opportunity to defer capital contributions down the road. And I think that's probably what we've been doing here is, user rates are typically a very political thing. People don't want to raise them too much. And without that requirement to say, we're obligated to raise them this much just to cover the capital replacement costs of our systems, then, it's
going to shut down in a second.
Oh, it's, don't pay enough now and pay a lot more later kind of thing. So Liam, did you have any sort of, anything to add about a private system?
I just want to echo that the comptroller of water rights requires that all private utilities rates are approved by them, and they require that the full capital renewal and replacement is embedded in those rates. Yeah. So there's only there's not a ton of private, like larger private systems in the province, and but they are regulated to a level that ensures that they're financially sustainable. And municipal systems have been a little softer, so to speak.
Thanks, Liam. I'm going to ask Lisa Beck to go next, and then a couple in the chat.
Great, thank you. I just want to thank everybody for all the work that they've put into this. There's been reams and reams and reams of paperwork to go through, and it's a lot to sort through. But I guess just really quickly, my question is around the financial aspect of it. I mean, I would assume that an RFP process has not happened. So where are these numbers coming from that are being put out as potential of what we're looking at? And because I mean, projects like these are quite substantive, and cost overruns, seem to plague us in a lot of capital projects. And I mean, this is a very small infrastructure project. So, what is the pool that we're tapping into to do an RFP, and how likely is it to get reasonable bids that come back to the municipality?
The cost estimates are they're our best guesses based on the information available of what it would cost to hire a contractor to do this work. We've I guess more just this year started taking on more of this type of work with our own staff, and this was for a drainage project. But that's another delivery option that it would have to be balanced with operational needs. But for the most part, we've assumed that we'd be tendering works and hiring contractors, having to also hire consultants to produce the tender documents and oversee the works. And so, we've got some project experience. The per meter estimates that we're using for water main are similar to, or a little bit higher than what we actually saw for costs for the water main replacement in 2020. We've built in some escalation for inflation, expecting that things won't be done right away. So I would say they're still Class D cost estimates. So we're still applying a 40% contingency to them. That's built into those numbers as well. But of course, there's no guarantees about infrastructure costs. And yes, you can tender something and end up facing a decision to take on a cost that's, more than you anticipated, or change the plan. So, but this is our best guess, our best estimate.
Thank you. I wonder, there's a couple of questions in the chat. There's one from, I think we talked about the other phases. Sarah Graham to everyone, costs for referendum and who will pay. There's two options to get assent of the community. We can do either a full-blown referendum or a lower cost. Other alternative is to do an alternative approval process whereby the municipality makes a public notice that they intend to spend X dollar, borrow X dollars on behalf of Bluewater. And then it's the onus is on residents of Bluewater to come back and notify the municipality of their of their non-support of that initiative. If it comes back that 10% of the registered voters in that water area express their non-support of the initiative, then it fails. You have to go back to actually do a referendum. An alternative approval process is what was used for getting assent to borrow for the Cope Bay water treatment plant and for the Tunstall Bay Reservoir project that's currently underway right now in Tunstall Bay. We use that method. It's very low cost because really we're just advertising and taking letters from people. So that's we want to get the project out there. We want to get the public support, and we want to go that route ideally so that there is no cost. If it does go to have to be an actual referendum, then there's polling, there's voting, and there's advanced polling, and people are paid for that. So there would be a cost probably somewhere. You got to purchase boxes and votes and things like that. So there would be a cost anywhere kind of between $5,000 and $10,000 to hold an actual referendum. And that would be a cost of the local service area that's undertaking the borrowing. So that's to answer your question, Sarah. Graham, the cost for a water access lot with no buildings and no water usage. What is the fee that an unconnected property pays? If that's the question, currently unconnected properties are paying $600. An unconnected property, whether it would have water usage or not, would be subject to the parcel tax. We would attach it to every single parcel tax because eventually that lot is going to be developed. It's going to be attached to a water system and it's going to benefit from that. So we want to make sure that that unconnected property pays their share all the way along too. I hope I answered that question, but if not, please clarify for me. Rob McGregor, as there are many other water systems and projects on Bowen that might need funding, what is the borrowing capacity and where are we now in consuming that capacity? Does this capacity limitation mean that we need to move quickly on these phases? No, it absolutely does not. We are limited by the community charter as to the amount that we can borrow. We're limited to 25% of certain revenues that we have, property tax being the biggest one of them, and certainly that's in the formula. Right now, our borrowing, it's called our debt servicing limit. It sits at about $2.5 million. So we can't spend more than $2.5 million a year on principal and interest payments. At the moment, this year, we're looking to spend about $250,000 on principal and interest payments. We've recently locked in the fire hall debt. We've recently locked in the community center debt. By the time we add those to the formula, our debt servicing overall with Tunstall Bay and Cope Bay water treatment debt to all of it in together, I think I've got about $850,000 in debt servicing costs that we're looking at for next year. So we're limited to that $2.5 million. So we're not anywhere near that ceiling. So I don't think that we need to rush out and borrow money at this point. But yeah, we're not constrained by that.
Kristen, could I add to that? Not
Oh, please.
Not to step on your toes.
Jump in.
I'm not a CPA or anything of that matter, but I was heavily involved in municipal finance. So the legislation is really good in terms of protecting municipalities from going over or overextending their borrowing capacity. And Kristen and I have had lots of discussions about, our maximum borrowing limits and things like that. And really what we want to do is further, like even further, I'm muddling my words, sorry, be even more conservative than what the legislation allows for. So we most definitely want to ensure that we don't hit our borrowing limit. We want to stay well within our borrowing capacity, because you never know what's going to happen in a municipality and where we may need money. And so for us, we really want to try to stay at the 50, maybe 60%, pushing it liability servicing limit, to always leave room for emergencies or unknowns that and also for future needs, because these are long-term debt obligations that we don't want to completely chew up all that room. So, Kristen has been doing a fantastic job at looking at, well, what are all of the current debt servicing requirements across all the different utilities and all the different assets, and let's make sure we stay in that middle mark and not go much above that. So that's the goal anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they are 30-year borrowings. So, the capacity that we use now is reducing the capacity for people that are coming after us 10 and 20 and 30 years down the line. So we have to, we have to think about that too. Gary suggests we should incorporate a bike lane into the upgrades and apply for a grant. That's kind of a neat idea. I'll leave that with you, Patrick. Next, from iPhone 5 to everyone, if the referendum doesn't garner enough support, what's the alternative, or is there one? Yeah, if we don't have the approval to borrow and we have to move forward with water improvement upgrades that cost big dollars, that cost large sums of money, our alternative is to tax. Our alternative is to set a parcel tax every year and complete what we can for the amount of a parcel tax. I suppose I don't. Hand up, I think. There's no capacity within the municipality itself now to self-fund this and collect it back over time. We have significant number of capital projects on the go that are going to really rely on those reserve funds and those surplus funds that we have built up over the years. So, yeah, I mean, there's no internal capacity to self fund these projects.
Can I ask a question? Bill Edmonds here. I'm on Bluewater.
Mm-hmm.
Windjammer. Pardon me, on Windjammer. It seems to me that to sum this all up, and somebody I think tried to ask this question before, so it's about $10,000 a property per year for four phases. Does that add up to 40,000, let's say? Does that make sense?
So the
with all the phases,
the annual parcel tax for each of those phases, phase 1, 2, and 3. Phase 1 was 1.56 million. Phase 2 was 1.46 million. Phase 3 was 1.6 million. So they're all very close.
Yes, right. About $10,000 a piece.
So in total, like the parcel tax annually for 30 years for the first one is about 608. The second one's about 568. The third one's about 623. So for those 3 phases of that project, 6, 6, 12, about $1,800 a year for 30 years to complete those 3 identified phases.
Right, or $30,000 or $40,000 if it chose to pay up front.
Oh, if we did the present value calculation.
The question that I sensed somebody was trying to ask earlier is, what does the the next guy in, the 154th user
Mhm.
pay after we've spent 30 or whatever $1,000?
Yeah, the 154th guy would pay one hundred.
But would he have to pay $30,000 to join?
No, he would, or she would, they would have to pay the remainder of the outstanding debt at any time. That the amount of that outstanding debt, instead of being divided among 153 properties, would then be divided among 154 properties.
Okay, he would pick up but where the previous owner left up. Well,
Yeah.
no, he would be a new guy, but he would get the facility, but not have to have paid for it
There's a,
up till then.
in order to join a water system, any of the municipal water systems requires a contribution to the infrastructure. And that contribution depends on the value of the infrastructure minus the outstanding debt. So there would be depending on how much of the infrastructure is paid off, the debt's lower, the value of the infrastructure is higher, the contribution would be higher for somebody joining the system.
Yeah. But they would also then be subject to the remaining years of that parcel tax. So they would, if it's a new lot or a new subdivision, there's a fee to join to kind of, it's almost like a way to create some equity between those lots. And then they would be, have to pay the remainder year, the remaining time left on that parcel tax as well. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
There's another one in the chat, Kristen, about essential service upgrade costs.
Are there other essential service upgrade costs that will be attributed to individual households if the BIM cannot fund? I'm not 100% sure I understand the question. Neil, are you able to just explain it a little more, the question? Are there other essential service upgrade costs that will be attributed to individual households if the BIM cannot fund?
I think he's
like outside of our capital maintenance program.
I think, Kristen, it's Liam here. I wonder, that's what I was wondering. We don't know of or anticipate any other essential service costs specific to Bluewater that would be required. And generally speaking, for roads and things like that, it's financed through our annual capital renewal and replacement program.
Mm-hmm.
So I think without further clarification on the question, I hope that provides a bit of an answer.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Fine. I think I touched on that earlier, Liam, about repaving of roads based on the condition. I know that there's been a culvert upgrade program that the Muni has been doing throughout the island. Doesn't make sense to be putting in new water mains and leaving old rotting out culverts in. That would be an opportunity to get those done at the same time. So this is a larger aspect that the Muni would have to look at, other upgrades that would be done at the same time that the water mains are going in, and then that would delve into probably the road works budget, those kind of things, correct?
Definitely, if we're going to do a water main, typically it'd be a cut and cover kind of thing where we cut a trench, dig out the old pipe, put a new pipe, and then fill it and pave it. But if the road was in such condition that it was deemed necessary to renew it, then we would do the whole thing then.
We have been the forgotten community.
I know some neighborhoods that are see the state of their roads as traffic calming.
Yep.
Good point. There's a clarification about the 4 phases, Kristen.
Yeah, so the initial project, the whole thing was earmarked for 6.26 million. Patrick went kind of back to really identify the scope of the project that that he felt was highest priority that needed to be done. And has come back with these phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I believe that initial information was removed from the website, and Patrick has replaced it with this secondary schedule.
And just phase 4 is hopefully we can get to a place where we have, well, the goal is to get to a place where we have adequate reserves, like the private water systems are required to have to fund capital replacement. So it wouldn't necessarily be 4 rounds of borrowing. I mean, we can hopefully get to a place where we have reserves capable of funding capital replacements before phase 4. That would be the hope.
Okay, speaking of reserves, there's some information in the package regarding rates. This will be discussed by the local advisory committee and a recommendation made to council. I don't think we have time to cover that in this meeting now. Staff agree?
Maybe I'll just say something really quickly about it, because I do think it's important to get some of that information out there. And just for some history, there was not, our meeting in July was not very well attended. So just for those of you who weren't there, we brought forth a metered rate bylaw, a more aggressively metered rate bylaw. And this is in keeping with the direction from council, which was to embed conservation principles into our utility rates. And following up on that discussion that we had earlier around, we want to implement conservation methods into our practices. So we drafted a proposed metered rate bylaw. We started with Bluewater. Bluewater, the LAC and people who attended that meeting were quite positive about it, and they actually encouraged me to move forward with implementation in the current year. We then took that same bylaw to King Edward Bay, and we took that same bylaw to Bowen Bay. And well, some of the feedback I heard back from them was, well, just take a little bit more cautious approach. Why don't you try with starting with showing people what their consumption was and what their bill would be under this new model kind of thing. And to be honest, I listened to that feedback and I took it to heart, and I liked it. I took this summer to compile all of the meter readings in the 3 local service areas. So I have produced and put forward and extrapolated kind of a what your bill would be like if we had this model in place at the time, because I think it's important that people have the opportunity to see their consumption, see it relative to other people. There's a document in the agenda package, and we'll put it on the website too. And it shows everybody, no personal information at all, just your account number. So you can go and find your account number and you can see what your consumption would have been. What your consumption was. It was based on the consumption that we recorded by meter at everybody's home over the past year. Now, as Patrick said, we don't read meters throughout the winter. We read them once in December, and we read them again in kind of March, April, just to get a sense of consumption over those winter months. So I had to make some assumptions. I used those interim meter readings in December and those interim meter readings in March, and I used that data to calculate a per day consumption and said that was kind of similar to what the consumption would have been in that quarter. So from October to December, I used the consumption between September and December. I said that was what it would be for the quarter. For January to March, I used that consumption between sort of December to April and measured and calculated a per day consumption and said, okay, that's representative of what would have been consumed between January 1st and March 31st. So I encourage you to take a look at the document, find your property on it, have a look at it and see, and just, share your feedback with me about and with the LAC too, about what that would look like for you, and just take the opportunity. We want to get that information out there. What we found was that had we implemented it this year with those proposed metered rates, we likely would have come up a little bit short. So I'm really glad that we didn't do that. When we passed the Bluewater Park budget back in May of this year, we we included a rate increase, a revenue increase from 145,000 to 165,000. So we do have to set rates that will capture that additional revenue requirement in order to make sure that we can still make the budgeted contributions to the reserve funds for this year. So my recommendation to that will be discussed further in the LAC, but I just want to take this opportunity at the community meeting to make sure everybody had the information, is that we continue with a flat rate bylaw for this 2022 fiscal year, and look at implementation of the more metered rate bylaw, the more aggressive metered rate bylaw for implementation in January 2023, knowing that we need to tweak it a little bit based on the information that we have about the consumption, the difference in consumption from the winter to the summer months. And we'll probably have to do a little bit more work there to make sure that we can hit those revenue targets that we need to collect for the year. So that's all I had to say about that. And I think that we could probably from there move into the LAC meeting, unless there's any other discussion that anybody wants to have.
Kristen, it's Rob Duffy. I just want to thank you for putting all this together for the meter rate bylaw and switching it up a little bit. Just wanted to add, especially new residents in the Bluewater community, that Bluewater residents have been known across the island of being one of the best for water conservation for the last few decades. For some of the issues that we've gone through with 2004 having to reduce water consumption by over 40% from what 150 gallons a day we were assigned to. So we've been that model over the years, and we continue to promote that for water conservation through a bit more of aggressive water metering type of model that is needed, and especially to spread across the rest of the island, so that we're all conserving under that one big pot of water that we're all drawing out of, so that it doesn't run out at some time in the future for us.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
Trevor had a question about if we're going to fund future phases, phase 4 from reserves, would the annual or water fees need to increase, and what would the increase need to be? I think they would need to increase, and that's something that we'll have to work towards, is to make the system self-funded, so you don't have to borrow money whenever capital improvements and replacements are needed. But we'll have to look at what those rates would be. Couldn't give you an answer right now.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. I've put in the chat that a great email address for the LAC, which includes Patrick and Kristen, CFO and Director of Engineering, and our LAC members, is bwplac@bimbc.ca. It's in the chat. It's also on our website. Also, to sign up to mailing list, just go into our website and search subscribe, and you can be on the mailing lists. Thank you so much for coming and participating, and please do send any other further questions and comments that direction. We're going to go into a local advisory committee meeting that will be on YouTube if you want more information in another hour. At LAC members and council and staff, can you please stay on? Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.